Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the show. Tonight, we are going to break down the moves made by the Trump team on Friday. In our last episode, we covered the major headline, which was that Biden's transition team is being barred from the Pentagon transition program for the next 2 weeks. Defense Secretary Miller gave the statement citing holiday breaks. However, we believe the meanings are deeper than that. This was a major shift of dynamics behind the scene, as the legal battle still waged on. But it is coming to a halt. We are seeing the Trump team shifting their path to what we have outlined, using the Pentagon as the main power to push the defense back to offense. So today, we will break down another significant development that happened just on Friday. This happened around the same time Secretary Miller actually made the announcement. In reality, we had three things going at the same time. The first was the Pentagon action to deny Biden's transition. The second was the simultaneous reaction from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Secretary of Treasury Steve Mnuchin. The third, which was that the State Department's deterrence action. So let's talk about that. We will focus our attention on the second and the third event that unfolded. So what happened yesterday was three departments took action around the same time. Following SecDef Miller's statement, both Secretary Mnuchin and Pompeo came out with almost a joint statement. Their time was so close and quite synchronized. Both parties came out with a statement like this. They're seemingly responding to the news report from earlier in that day, saying that the two secretaries had some issues clashing over how to implement Trump's infamous 2018 executive order, which was on foreign sanctions and election interference. But they immediately took action with this release. The Commerce Department under Mnuchin restricted 59 additional Chinese companies. The statement also says the United States is adding 4 entities to its entity list for enabling human rights abuses within China by providing DNA testing materials or high-technology surveillance equipment to the PRC government. We urge the Chinese Communist Party to respect the human rights of the people of China, including Tibetan Buddhists, Christians, Falun Gong members, and Uyghur Muslims, and the members of any other ethnic and religious minority groups. In the 2018 executive order, there is the first portion, which is what we think will be used to combat foreign election interference. But the second portion is actually to apply sanctions based on those foreign influences. Here it reads, the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Treasury, in consultation with the heads of the other appropriate agencies, shall jointly prepare a recommendation for the President as to whether additional sanctions against foreign persons may be appropriate in response to the identified foreign interference and in light of evaluation in the report mandated by the Section 1B of this order. So this order is effective in that it has been used on Friday to actually combat foreign countries in their disruptions. What they actually did is indirectly announce that China is one of the, if not the primary, foreign entities in which has influenced this election. What the statement from Pompeo essentially means is that they have declared offensive actions against the actions of China. Think about what the statement says. It says against mass surveillance, military modernization, which has been how China was able to control US data and its citizen information. The statement then says, additionally, the Department of Commerce is adding 19 entities to the entity list for systematically coordinating and committing more than a dozen instances of theft of trade secrets from the US. Corporations to advance the PRC defense industry complex as the results of that. Also engaging in activities that undermines US efforts to counter illicit trafficking in nuclear and other radioactive materials, or using US exports to support the PLA, People's Liberation Army, and the PRC government's defense industry base, whose ultimate goal is to surpass the capabilities of other countries, primarily the United States. They view as competitors, particularly the United States. Now, why would Pompeo and the State Department add additional actions against China if it were to all just be reversed soon by the Biden administration in the next January? It's because they are so confident that they're all piecing together the motion to ensure that Trump wins for another 4 years. So they are setting up an international defense line in order to prepare for the future. But I will talk about that in more details later this episode. For now, there's a problem, and the problem is in order for you to attack, you must ensure that the stability within your nation is first stable. So do we have any indication as to that? Well, I think so. Here's the evidence. At the same time, Pompeo also released this statement, which is against the fraudulent election in Venezuela. This isn't the first time Pompeo has publicly called out the irregularities in Venezuela. They have also done sanctions in the past month. But this one is quite different, actually. It says, United States had sanctioned Excli Solucion Biometric CA or Excli CA for their support of the illegitimate Maduro regime's fraudulent December 6th legislative election. Okay, sounds familiar somehow, right? What I want you to do now is, in your head, switch the word Excli CA to Dominion and switch Venezuela to US in your head as I read on. Excli CA has millions of dollars of contracts with the illegitimate Maduro regime, providing electoral hardware and software to regime-aligned government agencies. Excli CA was aware of and involved in the regime's effort to rig the fraudulent December 6 elections, thereby undermining democracy and suppressing the voices of the Venezuelan people. Excli CA also helped Maduro's co-opted National Electoral Council to purchase thousands of voting machines from China, routing payments through the Russian financial systems. They shipped voting systems through Iran using rogue airlines Mahan Airline and Conviasa, both previously targeted by the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control. Do you get it? This is an indirect warning and a public demonstration of what will happen exactly in the US. Okay, let's keep reading. Still, in your mind, switch the word Excli CA for Dominion and Venezuela for US. Those who seek to undermine free and fair elections in Venezuela must be held accountable. Maduro's reliance on companies like Excli CA, as well as recently sanctioned PRC tech firm CEIEC to rig the electoral processes, should leave no doubt that the December 6th legislative election were fraudulent and do not reflect the will of the Venezuelan people. We urge that all countries committed to democracy to condemn the fraudulent December 6th election and the illegitimate regime's continuing effort to destroy democracy in Venezuela. So now, if you had done so, you would realize if we switched everything in this statement to US and Dominion, the exact same details can be applied to what will happen to Dominion and the US personnel involved in this fraud. Or should I say, irregularities. So just Friday, Pompeo and Mnuchin made two big movements to prepare for fighting against corrupted voting systems. That wasn't even the end of it. There is more. President Trump on December 18th signed into law a bipartisan legislation that forces foreign companies listed on American exchanges to observe U.S. accounting rules, a move that could see Chinese companies being delisted from U.S. exchanges. According to the Epoch Times, the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act will require Chinese companies to comply with U.S. auditing and reporting standards or face exclusions from the U.S. stock market exchanges. The bill was passed unanimously in the House earlier this month and passed in the Senate by unanimous consent in May. Under the law, foreign companies that fail to comply with the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board audits for 3 consecutive years will be subject to delisting from the U.S. exchanges. The rule also applies to companies whose shares are traded over the counter. The measure impacts Chinese companies such as Alibaba Group, holding runs by Ma Yun, JD, and also China Mobile Company, as well, whose audits that cannot be inspected by the board would also have to establish that they're not owned or controlled by a foreign government. A huge step to further limit China's economic growth, allowing the U.S. to actually focus on dealing with the CCP after it settles its domestic disputes in this election. But by now, you have probably seen how powerful Trump is when it's against the communist specter. Even during such turmoil inside the country, Trump's administration is still willing to combat the CCP. They will not delay any chance to prevent the CCP from growing within the next 2 years. It's essentially restricted China's global economic expansion into the US and pushed it back all the way before maybe even the beginning of the Obama administration, a move that is truly worth mentioning. Now, in an interview on Friday, Pompeo said US officials believe that Russia is behind the cyber attacks against SolarWinds, which led to a number of government agencies becoming compromised. He says this was a very significant effort, And I think it's the case that now we can say pretty clearly that it was the Russians that engaged in this activity. So is Pompeo playing into the narratives of Russia, Russia, Russia? You have to sort of look at where he is coming from with the statement though, because he's saying things that are different from his action. Remember, he literally just helped sanction a bunch of Chinese companies on the same day and applied more pressure to China. They cannot right now link the SolarWind attack to China yet, because that would draw too much attention to the main problem. Actually, or maybe shifting it away from the main problem. The main problem is the election issue at hand. Remember, we have to address both sides of the problem. Without a stable nation, you cannot face China. So what he did is give essentially an answer to the media, who will be satisfied with the whole Russian narrative and that Russia is involved in everything for the past 4 years. But in reality, anyone with an educated guess can see that China is the more likely candidate in this attack. Today's Trump tweet seems to confirm the suspicion we have. First, he says he has been briefed and that it is under control. Then he says Russia is definitely a disinformation, that China is more likely the one who actually did the attack. So it makes sense. Pompeo would say that Russia instead of China, because right now, if we have Pompeo saying that China is the culprit, it will essentially declare a war against China. We're not ready for that yet. We have to wait for the right movement. What is the right movement? Well, remember, Ratcliffe said China, Iran, and Russia were the top 3 who have officially been confirmed as the countries that have interfered in this election. So Pompeo isn't ruling out that, or only calling Russia in this case, as the sole perpetrator of the action. With the movements such as the following, there exists a series of strategies in which Trump may employ for the next 2 weeks. This is going to be both domestic and international. So what I'll give you is sort of the timeline from the Pentagon after it has halted the movements of Biden's transition team from the holiday break. So let me outline these actions for you, some of which we have talked about previously. But I want to make it apply more specific to our situation. So following the executive order, the insurrection activation in each battleground states would allow it to contest election results, take any and all election systems and devices for forensic auditing, arrest all involved with the irregular election, and protect all witnesses from threat, coercion. This includes judges. This precursor might be justified with the executive order if there is any or some grounds to a digital cyber attack. But that area is so gray and it's so blurred, which SolarWind might be one of the nonviolent approach to activating it. But even if the special operation team is activated into those battleground states, it likely won't cause civil unrest. Even if there's retaliation from the deep state, well, then that just justifies the Insurrection Act. But before we move on, I have to talk about how each state's governor will play a role in this. Remember, the Insurrection Act, as we know, the use of military forces has to be justified based on a pre-existing condition. One of them is that the governor is refusing to act on a federal order. For example, during the Arkansas school case under Eisenhower, the Supreme Court had ruled to allow the African American students into the school. It was the Arkansas governor who did not obey the federal order. So Eisenhower used the 101st Airborne to solve the problem in the state. So governor objection will play a key role in how Trump can go about doing this. But here's the problem. The Supreme Court, as we know, will likely object and go against Trump at this point. What is the workaround for that then? It's martial law. Suspend the Constitution's mandated rights to man. Suspend habeas corpus, which then leads to the next point I'm talking about. Activate martial order to quickly arrest any and all who are involved in the election interference and charge them through the U.S. military court. Then following that, restore the constitutional outline to perform a re-election with legal ballots to determine the winners in those counties and states. This is what I said might be a more logical step for them, as the requirements for martial law is quite broad. Therefore, the constitutional context is not defined as strictly as the Insurrection Act is. The forefathers and really, the last time Insurrection Act was used, it was against physical violence. There was no outline for a cyber attack or cyber warfare. But since the martial law is not really a law in the first place, it's more of a mode of action, Trump can do this with the support of the people. He said on Twitter asking for his supporters to gather on Washington, D.C. on January 6th to protest against the voting in Congress. What he is doing is he will ask the people to show up and give their wish as the building block and the founding essence of this country to deliver the wish of the American souls, to say that, President Trump, we support you. At the same time, the states that can no longer perform an accurate counting of ballots announce that state perform a total re-election, and before the ending results are tabulated and counted, the current term of the president must be extended to prevent the lack of a presidential leadership in this country. If there is enough evidence to suggest that the Biden team has treasonous grounds, immediately declare and cancel his presidential candidate qualifications, perform a nationwide re-election with the new candidates. I think we have to have sufficient evidence that suggests that Trump has dirt on him. But I think Trump will not use it unless it's absolutely necessary. I mean, we all know that Biden is just a puppet. Then, once everything is in place, appoint special prosecutors who will investigate and prosecute any and all foreign collusions within the domestic soil, from each level from the municipal to the federal, including big tech, legacy media, and Supreme Courts, and charge all those complacent in the meddling of the U.S. electoral system in a lawsuit. Completely take out the deep state from siphoning on the American people at last. Last night, it was reported that Sidney Powell was at the White House, as well as Giuliani. These two are perfect candidates for being appointed a special prosecutor, who will have exclusive rights to prosecute anyone involved. They're both heavily involved with the election meddling evidence collection already. We already saw this in place, but one of the last strategies is to put forth an executive order to freeze assets of China, Iran, and Russia, and apply strict sanctions, including using military actions such as we've seen already, drone strikes, assassinations, and economic sanctions. There are still more paths than the ones I've just outlined now, but these are enough to show people what the truth is. As it goes now, they are scared. It's all coming. And that is it for today. YouTube is censoring contents like this channel, where truth does not freely run on the platform. We rely on your support to share, like, comment, and subscribe to keep the channel growing. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening and a wonderful weekend. As always, thank you very much for watching Beyond the Noise. Good night.